Principle 8, provide the examinee with appropriate disclosure and obtain informed consent authorization. We've already talked a bit about that, but the first part was the notification that I give to the employer. Now let's talk about what we do with the employee. It's been said that it costs nothing and saves much, informed consent. It's absolutely true. I'm going to skip to the last point for a moment. Informed consent is a process. It is not an event. So when the person comes into my office and they sign the disclosure form and give me informed consent, the informed consent process isn't over. That's the first step. There are two general categories of applicants, of examinees in fitness for duty evaluations vis-a-vis the disclosure form. The one who says, all right, and they take a frickin' 45 minutes to read each page, underlying different, parts, making little marginal notations.
And then ask you to make a copy.
Well, yeah, they don't have to ask me to make a copy. I'm going to give them a copy at the end. Absolutely, they should have a copy. So they do all that, and then they eventually, after some questioning and phoning the union, they sign it. Like we're now 2 hours into the 3 hours we set aside. Whatever. Then there are those who go, give it to me. Yep. Where do I sign? Sign right there. Okay. Doesn't matter to me. Either one. I love all God's children. They're both fine. But I don't assume that the one who read it carefully has a better understanding of it than the one who signed it quickly. Remember, they both had it in advance. In most cases. Sometimes they don't. The next step of informed consent is, so, Mr. Harris, you just signed a disclosure and informed consent document? Yeah. Could you tell me in words that you might use with your best friend about what it is that you just signed? Yeah, I signed a document that said you can do whatever you want to do and say whatever you want and I'm screwed. All right. Then let's talk specifically about the part about access to report. Do you recall whether or not you have access to the report? No, I don't know. All right, well, let's go over that part. So now the person's telling me that their consent is not informed. Do I have informed consent just because they've signed it? No. Because in my notes, what I'm writing is what our discussion is. So when the time comes that the lawsuit is that I never knew what I was getting into in the first place, I'm going to have to say bullshit on that. That's not the way it comes down in my procedure. Because every time a person comes in for a fitness for duty evaluation, the very first part of this examination is that I want to hear in their own words their understanding of the key provisions of this disclosure and informed consent document. And if they can't tell it to me in their own words, we're not moving on until we have a correct understanding of it. So that's part of what I believe is informed consent, is that it's an ongoing process. It's not simply an event or a signature. We've talked about that, in my view, waiver of procedural rights or liability as a condition of the fitness for duty evaluation is never indicated. I think it fails the voluntary component that's so necessary for a waiver. And Gold and Schumann point out in their book, failing to obtain a consent later determined to be required cannot be remedied. There's nothing you can do about it. It's too late. So informed consent should never, ever, ever, in my view, be short-circuited.
And it can be also taking back the consent and everything stops like...
Absolutely. The question is, so can you withdraw consent and everything stops? You bet. So halfway through, the person says, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. I'm withdrawing my consent. Okay. All right. Whatever information I have isn't going to be communicated to the employer, except the process. Notice that on page 81, I also discuss the potential outcomes and uses of the examination. As a result of this examination, I may conclude that you are, 1, psychologically fit for duty and fully able to resume your duties, or 2, psychologically unfit for duty and unable to resume your duties. If I determine that you are unfit for duty, I may identify steps that you or your employer might take that could enable you to continue employment in your position, or alternatively, I may find that no recommendations are indicated. Regardless of the conclusions I reach and communicate in my reports, your employer may choose not to rely on my findings and recommendation in whole or in part when deciding on your status. Alternatively, your employer may rely entirely on my report in determining your fitness for duty. Thus, depending upon my ultimate conclusions and recommendations concerning your fitness for duty, and depending on your employer's consideration of my conclusions and recommendations, the results of this examination may have a significant impact on your current employment. Irrespective of my conclusions and recommendations, your employer still may choose to address the behavior that formed the basis for its referral to me in accordance with its policies and procedures. I don't want anybody coming back and saying, hey, I thought I was coming in for just like help. You know, a doctor, I saw Dr. Corey, you know, a psychologist, and going, good, this guy is going to listen to my problems and he's going to help me out and life's going to be good. I didn't know I could lose my job over this. So I'm laying it out. You know what the outcomes might be. Now, disclosure and informed consent, however you do it, should include a description of the nature and the scope of the evaluation. Sorry, steal your material. The limits of confidentiality, including any information that may be disclosed to the employer without the examinee's authorization. And under Pettis v. Cole, there is information that you can provide even without disclosure or informed consent. Now, does that mean that it's a good idea, even if the law permits you to communicate certain findings without informed consent? Not in my opinion. I would never do an evaluation without informed consent. It's not going to do it. I mean, there may be a lawful basis for doing it, but I'm not going to do it. Yes?
If you have an individual who withdrew consent, and then the police service can re-refer them for the duty evaluation, and you say you completed 3/4 of the assessment, would you start right at square one?
Okay, the question is, the person at some point in the process of the evaluation completes some testing, withdraws consent. Later, the referral comes through again, and this time they give consent. Yeah, depending upon the lag time, I'd probably start where we were before. Unless I had any reason, and I would talk to the employee. You know, when you were completing these tests initially, were you candid? Yeah, I was candid. We can just continue on from where we were. All right, great. If they say, no, man, I was really screwing with you, man. No, you don't want to be using those answers. You know, then I would accept that that was the case, and you know, I'm not going to get in a pissing match with the employee over those issues.